Okay, well, I think I'm going to get started now. So, my name is Marcia Raleigh, for those of you who don't know me. I am on the faculty in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, and I am also the Graduate Program Coordinator for the Department of Biomedical Engineering. I've worked with a number of my own students on fellowship applications. We've had a number of students in our department who have been successful with a number of different fellowship opportunities. So I'll speak to some of the ones that I'm more familiar with. And again, you know, I'm speaking from the perspective of biomedical engineering, so there may be other opportunities, and we'll talk a little bit about, you know, how to seek other opportunities and respond to those as well. Let's see. The other role that I play here is some of you may be familiar with. I know many of you are in our NSF funded IGERT PhD program. That is a multidisciplinary program focused on biofabrication and training PhD students in that. Just in that multidisciplinary field. And so I'm working with those students this year on this particular application opportunity, and like I said, I'm happy to help anybody else who's interested in this. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some quick logistics here, and then I want to mostly have this open for your questions. So we'll get through the nuts and bolts here. Okay, this is not really. Okay, so first, all of you are here, so you're obviously motivated to apply for fellowships, but just in case you need a little extra motivation, particularly with the NSF fellowship opportunity, why apply? So applying for fellowships, you may have heard this before, winning a fellowship is a prestigious award, it's a prestigious honor. This is something that will be on your resume, on your resume and in your applications from here on out forever. And it's a nice honor. It demonstrates that you were able to compete externally and compete successfully for funding. And some of you may be headed toward industry careers, not necessarily towards academic careers, but trust me, writing grants and successfully bringing in external funding is something that will be a part of what you will do for the rest of your careers as scientists and engineers. So this is an important skill set to cultivate. And also, as graduate students, the nice thing about getting a fellowship, you know, think very pragmatically here, is it will give you money. So if you are self-funded for your graduate work, then that provides some stability for you and provides some financial security for you. Also, and again, speaking specifically to the NSF Graduate Fellowship Program, the NSF pays a little bit better than some fellowship programs and possibly even the teaching assistantships that you're on right now. So specifically, the NSF is paying, their stipend levels now are $32,000 a year, and they also have a $12,000 education allowance as well. So that means that most of your tuition and a stipend will be paid for while you're here. The NSF Graduate Research Fellowships provide funding for 3 years over a 5-year period, so you can defer them. You just have to, you know, once you're awarded, which I'm positive that many of you will be successful for this, then you just have to keep in touch with the NSF. There are reporting requirements for activating this award each year, but we'll worry about that when we get there. We're focused on the front end here. Okay, so lots of good reasons for you to want to apply. Your main resource in the application process is their website. So I'm going to highlight a few key things that are very critically important for you to know, but I would strongly encourage you to use this as a resource. They have a number of FAQs and tips and details about each of the elements of the application that are extremely helpful. I've been there, I've read through it. I encourage you to do the same. So just basically what makes the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program unique. These fellowships are for identifying students who are early in their graduate careers, and they're specifically for students who are in science and engineering disciplines. So they want to train the future leaders of STEM. They want to identify early their superstars who have the potential to really make amazing contributions to their fields and support them so that they're successful in their graduate research. Okay? So any fellowship opportunity that you apply to, you've got to think about it this way. What is it that the funding agency that I'm applying to, what is their mission? What are they trying to achieve? And you want to make sure that your application is responsive to that mission. So this is a piece of persuasive writing. You may be very used to doing a lot of technical writing, but what this fellowship application is really a piece of persuasive writing that at the end of the day says, if you give me this opportunity, if you fund me, here's what I'm going to do with your money that's going to be amazing and it's going to make you look good. Okay, so no matter what you're applying for, that should be in the back of your mind when you're writing your application. Okay, what does success look like? If I'm successful, here's what you're going to get in return. Here's what I'm going to do for you, and so you should want to give me money because I'm amazing. Okay, so we'll talk about the limits of that and how to construct those arguments, but that's basically what you're trying to do, no matter where you're applying. So they're looking for people who have demonstrated potential to make significant contributions, science and engineering, research-based. Now, I know we have a number of course-based master's programs here. We have one in biomedical engineering, but this particular opportunity is looking for people who are going to make contributions to research, okay, and in science and engineering. I know we have a number of other disciplines represented at WPI, but that's the focus here, so just to be clear about that. Okay, a lot of fine print, don't worry too much about this. The main things I want to highlight is that in order to apply, you need to register in Fastlane, which is the online submission system. Probably most of the foundations that you're going to work with, if you're applying for fellowships, will have their own unique process. Make sure you understand that process and start it early, because if there are any problems with their website, you could have put all this effort in for nothing. So start early. On the days of submissions, I can tell you by many, not that I ever submit any of my grants last minute or anything like that, but you don't want to run into those problems on the day of submission. Important criteria specific to the NSF is eligibility criteria or citizenship. So you have to be a U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident in order to apply. Sorry, this thing keeps popping up here. There are limits because, again, they want to identify people who are early on in their careers, okay? So if you are a senior, so we have one senior represented here at least, or you have not completed more than 12 months of full-time of graduate work, then you are eligible. So they're looking for people who are early in their careers. So if you're a senior, first-year student, or second-year student, you are eligible to apply. There's extenuating circumstance. The IGRT students had pointed this out to me. If you've already earned your degree but you've had an interruption of graduate study of more than 2 years, you're also eligible. This is new. So one of the things I will keep, when you're looking at these applications, let's say you applied last year, well, some things have changed. Okay, so just always make sure that you reread the solicitation each year. Deadlines depend on your field of study. They're posted here. The other thing to note is the letters of reference are due. Now, anything that comes in after these deadlines is going to be returned without review. So as for any application, make sure you meet this deadline. There will be no exceptions. They're not going to. The system will be closed, and that will be it. I think that goes without saying, but never hurts to reiterate that. Okay. Okay. Again, these are just nuts and bolts things. Pay attention to the solicitation. I don't want to spend a lot of time reiterating the solicitation. This is all in writing. You can find this. Read this carefully. I just want to highlight a few things. Pay attention to formatting. This is really important because, again, if you do not adhere to the formatting requirements, your application will be returned without review. There are page limits for each of the 2 statements that you have to write. There's also an eligibility statement. So if you're one of those students who has been away from your graduate work for a while, has had that 2-year gap, they allow you to put in an eligibility statement that says, I am eligible because, and you can explain that there. Reference letters also have page limits, so make sure that your letter writers know that they only have 2 pages. And we'll talk more about letter writers later, because for any application, that's also really important. And then toward the end, we'll talk a bit more about the review criteria. So for any application, NSF is really great about this, but most solicitations will also have a section that talks about reviewer criteria. So this is where you kind of put yourself in the head of the reviewers and think, okay, well, this is what somebody who's reading this is going to be looking for. So I better make sure that I'm responsive and that I've addressed all of these issues, okay? And then the NSF, this again is, I'll point out when things are NSF specific. NSF has these very specific National Science Board approved criteria that they call intellectual merit and broader impacts. And we'll talk about that and how you can demonstrate that in your application in a moment, because that's critically important for an NSF application. Okay. Experiencing a delay here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the parts of the application, and this is I think where I want to spend most of the time. For this particular application, what they're looking for, there are two major components to it, two major essays, and that's what I want to spend the time talking about today. One is the personal statement, and they've restructured this, so if you've applied to NSF before, know that it's changed a little bit. The personal statement is where you include your personal and relevant background and future goals. So that's the whole purpose of this. It's a 3-page limit. The research statement is a separate statement that's 2 pages, and that's what are you going to do as a graduate student in your plan of study. Okay, so here's some general tips from the website, and I can just tell you, so what in preparing for this and preparing to work with the students this year, I actually went to some of my former students who are undergraduate students who have been successful at winning NSF Graduate Research Fellowships, just to kind of take a look at what types of things they include in their personal statements. So how many of you have started this application already? Okay, good, because when I saw that this was going to be the 19th, I was like, that's getting kind of close to the deadline. You really only have about 6 weeks to finish this, which may seem like forever, but we all know that it goes by really quickly. So in thinking about the types of things that you're going to put in these personal statements, just give me some examples. For those of you who have started, do you have like a theme or a focus that you're really excited about? Is anybody willing to share that with the audience? Or a mouth's full of pizza? Yes? Oh, you don't have to read it. Just give me some, hit the highlights. What's your story? If you had to give me a 1-minute elevator pitch of who are you and why should I give you money? Okay. Yeah, here, come on up. Great. Oh, okay.
My name is Jessica Roses, and I have a previous background in structural engineering, but my goal is to teach engineering at the university level. And so to achieve that goal, I want to perform critical research in the field of structural engineering and develop new concrete cementitious materials that will change the way people think about concrete. So that's my...
Change the way people think about concrete, like concrete. That's excellent. All right, thank you. All right, let's have a hand for our volunteer. That's a great, and you see that was an excellent example. Thank you for stepping up. So, wants to teach engineering, wants to change change the way people think about concrete. I love that. That's, I'm a structural engineer. This is my background. Here's what I want to do. If you give me money, I'm going to teach people. I'm going to develop new materials for structural engineering, and I'm going to use that to teach and to make great new contributions in my field. So there's a real passion there, and also you can really clearly see how this will be applied broadly. So not a lot of technical detail, so that's really good, because we'll get into this in a minute, but again, thinking about your reviewers, you may not have somebody who's an expert in concrete on your review panel, so you need to have a real broad appeal. And the other thing that I'll highlight about that example, again, thank you, is that you're really pitching who you are. Who you are and what you're going to contribute. So it's almost like a self-branding. Does somebody else want to give an example? I saw your hand up.
Well, I was going more on the theme of like cultural background and like transitioning from, I guess, female STEM field and focusing on like wanting to be in academia and kind of building on that.
Okay, so building on your personal story, how being a woman in STEM, for example, and sort of the cultural transition, how did you get to where you're going? Okay, so these kinds of things, these are the kinds of things you want to think about. In a way, this is kind of unique. If you think about applying for a fellowship, the grants that I apply for, especially once you're beyond your early career years, they're less interested in who you are than they are about what specifically your research accomplishments have been. So this is kind of a unique opportunity to really pitch yourself. What are your goals? And again, what is the world going to gain if you're successful as a leader in STEM? Does that make sense? I'm going to stop here for a second. Are there any questions? Okay. So the kinds of things to include in the personal statement. So I've seen all sorts of things in helping students prepare for this. One of the things that I saw in some of the ones that have been successful was really that development of your personal story and your personal goals, but in the context of what have you done in the past and what has that taught you about it. So there should be a real grounding in experience when you're developing your personal story. And those are the ones, at least the ones that I've seen from students who have been successful. It talks about things like your leadership experience. So I'm going to, again, speak from biomedical engineering because that's my background and those are the students I've worked with. So for example, one of my former students just started a PhD program at Dartmouth. She applied and she was awarded a fellowship last year. Her story really focused on observing a spinal cord repair surgery for the first time, and what that was like to stand there in the operating room and see that patient and understand, what she was designing, the materials that she was working with, how that would really have an impact. And then she went on to talk about her leadership experiences, her undergraduate research experiences. So again, if you've had an opportunity to do research as an undergraduate, that should really be a highlight. What did that teach you? What did you do? What did you contribute? And what did that teach you? Also, for your past experiences, make sure to highlight if you were in, say, a research experience for undergraduates program, for example, or you had an opportunity. This particular student I'm going to keep referring to had undergraduate research experience over summers, but she also volunteered part-time over at UMass Medical School. For 3 years, she worked as a research technician in addition to all of her coursework at WPI, and had an opportunity to develop new materials. And she talked about the interplay between the coursework she took and how that enabled her to contribute to the lab. So really it was kind of a personal development story, but it was very much grounded in technical aspects in her technical training. But it still told the story of, I want to help patients. These are all the different ways that I've contributed. Also, if you've done an undergraduate research experience, you may have had the opportunity to present at a national or international conference. So definitely make sure that you highlight that you've had some experience with that. Even better, because the student had been working for 3 years in a medical research lab, she had a couple of publications. So if you have publications, definitely include those, because what that does is that gives, there's no more concrete way of demonstrating that you have made contributions to your field than original research and publications. Does that make sense? So if you have any of that, or patents. This particular student also, as part of her senior capstone design project, developed a technique that we submitted a patent on. So, so again, that she didn't have the patent cited because it's not issued yet and the application wasn't public yet, so she couldn't, but I'm just mentioning that. Okay? So, now, I'm going to get to this a little later, but it won't hurt to repeat it. You're making all these wonderful claims about yourself, and obviously, you want to brag about yourself. Some people are really good at that. Some people are not so good about that. So again, make sure that by grounding what you're saying about yourself and how awesome you are in experience, in specific examples of the things that you've contributed, can really help give credibility to your claims of awesomeness. So again, let me see if I'm forgetting anything. Be yourself, tell your story, and again, connecting your personal statement, connecting those past experiences with how you got. So this is really about how you got to where you are today, but that should connect then to what you want to do in the future and what your research plans are. Yes?
I have a question on that, because, from a personal example, I worked on a design project that was, I presented at several conferences and won a few awards, but the theme of that project wasn't really related to, the type of research that I'm currently working on right now, or where, I want to move forward. So I don't know if it would be relevant to include in the personal statement.
Okay.
Despite actually, getting a lot of awards with it.
That's an excellent question. Okay, I'm going to repeat the question just because I imagine you guys haven't all heard it. So the question was about, okay, so I did this really great undergraduate, I'm assuming undergraduate, was an undergraduate project. I won awards, I got to present on it, but it's not at all connected with what I'm doing in the future. That's okay. Still talk about that, because you do still want to highlight your aptitude as a scientist and an engineer, even if it's not directly relevant. What did you learn from that experience? So I'm going to keep going back to this one example of this successful student. She had, one of the things that we worked on together was she wrote a constitution and started a chapter of Engineering World Health here at WPI. So that wasn't at all connected with everything else she had done. She was working at a biomaterials lab on to develop orthopedic biomaterials that could be used for fracture healing. In her undergraduate volunteering work, when she did her capstone design, it was on a scaffold that had antimicrobial properties that could be used for wound healing. So those were different. And then in between, she saw a need through her coursework, and she weaved this together really nicely, for students who wanted to have more opportunities to apply what they've learned. And again, invoke WPI, that's what we do here, right, is we're very focused on the application of knowledge. Lehrkunst, you're all probably very familiar with that by now. But what she what she, so in connecting that, that's kind of how she did it, is that, you know, I've had all this great basic research experience, applied to things, but more of my colleagues, I saw a need at my institution to provide opportunities where biomedical engineering students could apply what they learned in their classes to actually helping somebody. And this was an organization that would enable that, to do medical device design for low resource settings. So I took the initiative and I started this, you know, organization. And actually, it was interesting because she was also nominated for a leadership award at WPI because of that, and she won. So then she was able to say, you know, connect that too. So again, you know, so it's bragging and highlighting all the awesome things that you've done, but in a very, you know, constructed way that is very supported. So you can connect that for sure. Like, don't leave out anything as an undergraduate experience just because you don't think it's relevant to what, you know, to what you're going to be doing in the future. You know, everything has, you know, has a place within reason. And again, if it would be helpful for you to, you know, I'd be happy to look at it, have other people look at it, and see what they think. Do you have a question?
Yeah. On that note, I just wanted you to be able to speak.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I worked for a year before coming back to graduate school. Because the work I did definitely doesn't really tie into research. How do I tie that in?
Okay. Yeah. So working for a year. So many of you have had some experience in the working world. You may have that extenuating circumstance because you've been out in industry for a couple of years or out, you know, doing research somewhere else. So how do I connect that? So I know the insider information here. I know Emily. And so she worked as a CAD engineer, correct, for an orthopedic device company, and which is not directly connected to what she's doing. But so what I would recommend is taking that experience and what did you learn from that experience? It may not be exactly what you wanted to do, but hopefully, you know, even if you learn that that's not exactly what you want to do with the rest of your career, it's given you some guidance, some personal guidance as to, you know, the direction that you're heading in. So you may not be applying that directly, but certainly include that because that's relevant experience. Yeah. Thanks for that. Other questions? These are great examples, guys. Any other questions about the personal statement? Okay, is this all making sense? So I think what you don't want to do, I mean, you want to tell your personal story, but I think you've got to be a little bit careful about making it too personal. You want to be very specific, again, about what you've accomplished, because you're trying to paint a picture for a reviewer of somebody who has been engaged in their field, who has made contributions to their field, and is going to continue making contributions to their field. Does that make sense? Okay. So to the people who are seniors or maybe haven't had a lot of research experience, and actually a lot of you may have, we'll move to the research statement now. Some of you may be just starting out, so writing that research statement may be a little challenging. I would encourage all of you to work with your research mentor. If you're getting started here at WPI, hopefully you have somebody that you've worked with or are working with, even if you are only a few weeks into your project. But bear in mind that students who are seniors who have not started their project yet, they don't even know where they're going to graduate. Like if you're applying for this as a senior in college, you don't even know where you're going to college. You don't even know where you're going to graduate school yet, let alone who your mentor is going to be. So you can still craft a very compelling research statement about your future plans, even if you don't know. So I know some of you who are PhD students may be rotating in a lab and you're not sure that that's the lab you're going to land in. It's okay. Again, the statement about what you're planning to do with your research, you can craft that even if you're not 100% certain, okay? So moving on to the research statement, one of the things, just a couple of things that I wanted to point out there. The main thing is just to avoid jargon. So when I've worked with students in the past, you know, there were great applications but weren't necessarily successful, I think one of the things I've noticed is that it's 2 pages. You don't have a lot of time, okay? You don't have a lot of space. I've encouraged students or worked with students to try to put in a figure. You don't need to put in a figure. You can paint a very compelling picture just with the words that you choose, and it may not, it's up to you, but all the ones that I've seen have been successful don't have a figure in them at all. They do, however, have references so that you can really, again, and references, citations of people who are leaders in the field. Even better, citations from your own lab if you know who you're going to work with, or citations from work that you've done, which you may not have because, again, this is a very early career type of opportunity, so you may not have a lot of papers yet. But wherever you can cite somebody who is really, the leader in your field, you're connecting yourself with, oh, I understand my field. I understand who the thought leaders are in my field. So that can really help to lend credibility to your research statement. Okay? Does that make sense? So when you're thinking about the research statement, maybe I'll move ahead here a little bit just to make sure that I cover the rest of this. The research statement should, again, thinking about the review criteria. What are they looking for? Okay? They want to see that you're proposing something that's an important idea, that is going to make important contributions to the field. So like, I'm going to change the way people think about structural materials. I'm going to change building practices or whatever it is that you're planning, something that's really big picture. You want to start from the big picture idea and then narrow it down to, okay, this is a really important problem, and you want to demonstrate that you understand what the current state of the art is in your field. And then you want to identify, because you don't want it to be like, oh, well, there's lots of people working in this space, or, here's what's being done, so look, this problem is solved. You want to funnel that down into a very specific need, okay? So here's the big problem, here's where we are today, here's where the gap is, here's the hole that I'm going to fill with my research. So make it very specific, okay? Then it'll be very clear, and I ask students this all the time, what does success look like? Okay, if you go through and you finish your thesis project, what are you going to have to show for it at the end? What will you have accomplished? And these are the kinds of things that you want to communicate. The things that the reviewers are looking for is they want to see that you're working on an important problem. They want to see that you have the tools, that you have the experience, the knowledge, and the resources yourself and at your home institution that will enable you to achieve what it is that you set out. You don't want to be too ambitious. You may not, trying to think of a good example. You may not be able to say cure cancer, but you may be able to identify, how the mechanism of action of a particular protein or pathway. You see what I mean? So like that would have important implications. So be very specific again, so it's very clear what success looks like. That's what I've seen in the student. The other thing that I noticed, and I've gotten this feedback when I've written for the NSF myself, I had a summary statement for a grant that I was submitting, and I had an opportunity to meet with a former NSF program officer who's a grant consultant who works with faculty here at WPI. And I work in vascular tissue engineering, and so I work with smooth muscle cells and endothelial cells. Well, just by abbreviating that to SMCs and ECs, she's like, my eyes glazed over within the first paragraph. So you don't need a lot of acronyms. You don't need a lot of jargon. Again, keep it high level. When I turn that into a number of people in the United States who have aneurysms and that there's no good treatment because they just, surgeons, the only option they have is just watch and wait. And once the aneurysm gets to a certain size, they can operate. But before that, there really isn't anything else they can do. There's no good medical treatment. It's like, okay, that's impact. Now I'm interested. There's no way to treat this problem. So, now I can see that there's a real need here. You see what I'm saying? So, but that's something that's kind of a global. Anybody who's reading that can note it, can understand immediately why that could be why that's an important goal. So one thing that really struck me on reading, because I'm so used to writing research strategy, writing research proposals that are very detailed and very specific about how I'm going to do things. So the specific type of buffer that you're going to use for a reaction, is that important? Probably not. You can be very general in the approach. You want to give enough detail and, again, enough citations so it's clear that you understand your field, you understand the limitations, you understand what you're going to do. You have a very clear and actionable plan, but avoid a lot of jargon. Why is it important to avoid too much jargon in this? Are you going to have somebody who's reviewing your application who is an expert in your field? No. In fact, you saw that there are 4 deadlines. There's some general areas. I'm not going to spend time on it now, but go to the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship page and look for, they have tips on choosing your area of specialization. So within each of those, like engineering, I mean, that's extremely broad, right? I mean, if you're working on concrete or working on, blood vessels, you could be, it's engineering. So they have very specific tips on choosing the right subdiscipline so that when your application goes in, it goes to people who are, could probably understand what you're talking about. But recognize that that person may not be, whoever's reading it may still not be an expert in your field. So you don't want to go too much in depth about, a specific technical aspect because they may not understand it. You want to make sure that the big picture is very clear. questions about the research statement. So again, it's only 2 pages, and I'll talk about some of the specifics here in a second. This keeps popping up. I guess I better update that. Yes?
So as far as just saying what area you're in, for tissue engineering, for example, it would be biomaterials and it would also be cell biology.
Mhm.
So do you put that breakdown? Because I think you have this option in there, which is like 50% this.
Right. I would work with your research advisor to see what so the question is, if you're doing a tissue engineering project and you have an option for biomaterials or cell biology, they can enable you to do a breakdown of 50-50. So again, if there is a strong cell biology component to it, like you're really interested in how cells respond to a particular material, and those are important outcomes, and I think it probably would be a good idea to make sure that has a potential to going to reviewers that would understand that. Yes?
When you talk about broader impact, even if you select a subcategory, you're still saying a broader impact is in categories other than this that you selected that you're specifically applying for as part of your statement.
Right. So broader impact. So the question is, if you choose a particular subdiscipline, can you say that there are broader impacts in other areas? Does a broader impact have to be specific to your discipline? I'll talk about that in a second. Broader impacts for this application, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but basically it's, does it have the ability to make contributions that are important to society? So that can either be through the intellectual merit. So while we're on that topic, let me get to that for real quick. So I talked a little bit about the review criteria, and I'll spend a couple minutes. It's a nice segue into intellectual merit and broader impacts and what that means. Again, if you go onto the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship page, it gives examples. Under the FAQs for applicants, it actually gives specific examples of what intellectual merit and broader impacts mean for this solicitation. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. So again, clear goals, make sure you have the resources to do the work, what will you achieve if you're successful with the research plan, and again, past achievements and experience. So the reviewers are being asked to look holistically at you as and your potential. So strength of your academic record, strength of your experiences both in research and leadership and outreach activities are all important to paint a picture of who you are, what you've contributed so far this early in your career, and how you're going to continue to make those contributions. So that gets to the 2 review criteria. So particularly in your research statement, you want to make sure, and this is when I'm applying to NSF grants, the summary statement, 1-page summary of my grant, I have to put a specific section that says intellectual merit, broader impacts. Don't make your reviewers guess. Be very clear. These folks are probably reading about 20 applications or so. I don't know what the amount is. We actually have 2 faculty on our IGRT program who reviewed last year. There may be other faculty at WPI who've reviewed. So if you want to get some specific insider information about what reviewers talk about, I can connect you with those folks. For intellectual merit, you want to demonstrate that you're going to advance knowledge and understanding within your own field and across disciplines. So it can be, a little broader in that regard. So like I said, if I'm going to design a model that's going to enable me to develop medical treatments for aneurysm that don't exist, I'm contributing something new in my field. But being able to treat patients with aneurysm, maybe a broader impact for society. I'm filling a gap that doesn't exist, a need that doesn't exist, or not a need that doesn't exist. You don't want to go after a need that doesn't exist. I'm fulfilling a gap in knowledge in my field and providing something that will have benefit. For the NSF Graduate Research Fellowships, one of the other things that they list specifically as broader impacts are your experience and potential to engage in building. This is an NSF goal. Again, be mindful of the goals of your funding agency that you're applying to. They want to develop a more diverse STEM workforce. So, engaging women, underrepresented minorities, people who have traditionally have not earned degrees in STEM fields or have not, gone on to pursue careers in STEM fields. So we want to broaden that pool of people who are contributing intellectually to the science and engineering enterprise and the economic enterprise in this country. Okay, so one way you can do that, get involved in outreach and community service if you haven't. So your application is due in about 6 weeks. If you have not had an opportunity to do this, I can tell you about a couple things. We've talked about this with the IGRT students. There are a number of outreach opportunities here on campus. Judge a science fair. There's usually regional science fairs at the middle school and high school level. volunteer to tutor students in your discipline. There are lots of opportunities to do that. We have a number of outreach events that occur on this campus on, at least on a monthly basis, if not more. For example, I'll give you one quick example. There's an event on Saturday, October 18th, that's going to be hosted at WPI called Geek is Glam. This is an event that is being held in collaboration with the Girl Scouts of America. There are, I think we're expecting about 600 girls between the ages of in the 4th to 6th grade who are going to be on campus, and they're going to be going around to see a bunch of different demonstrations and stuff here on campus. So they're looking for volunteers that can help. They have a few slots left for workshops and demonstrations if you have an idea for a workshop that you want to do with a group, in your department. And those are only, if you do a workshop or demo, you only have to devote an hour. You only have to do that once. You can do it 4 times if you want to, but you only have to do that once. So again, it's a way that you can get some experience in sharing your knowledge, sharing your discipline, and inspiring the next generation of people in STEM who are going to carry on that torch. Does that make sense? So, and they're also looking, if you don't have the time or the bandwidth to put together, a workshop or module, they're also looking for volunteers that will help shuttle this large number of visitors around to each of the different demos. So those are some examples. There are a number of different K through 12 outreach opportunities and community service opportunities here at WPI. So if you're interested in getting involved in something like that, let me know and I can connect you with folks on campus who can help you develop that. There may be, you may have, I know we have a Biomedical Engineering Society chapter here at WPI. You may have professional society chapters in your own department, so get involved with those too. I know ours does a lot of outreach. We do a lot of outreach through the BMES chapter. That can, you can plug into an organization that's already got stuff going on. And if you don't, even if you haven't done something in STEM, I had a student that I worked with one year who is an EMT and worked as a ski patrol, giving skiing lessons. So again, teaching, community service, that kind of thing. Even if it isn't STEM, that's something that you can speak about that maybe informs your desire to be a leader, a teacher, a scientist, engineer. Okay, I think I only have a couple more slides here. Let's get through that. Okay, so the resources, make sure that you check out the website. There's also an applicant help link in the Fastlane module that they tell you to look for. The other thing is past winners. So I have applications from a student who won last year that she's willing to share. So I have that on the MyWPI site for the seminar that I'm teaching. So if you email me, I can give you access to the MyWPI site if you want to take a look at that. I also have, they're willing to share those, but I'm not going to post them or distribute them widely, but you can come and take a look at those. I also have, there are also a number of blogs. So when this student was preparing last year, she actually went out online and found there are a number of different blogs and websites where people have posted their winning applications. So I can send you the links to some of those that she sent me that said these were really helpful. So you guys have a lot of information available to you. I also have applications from 2 other students, one who won in 2011, one in 2012. They're both respectively 4th and 5th year PhD students at Cornell in biomedical engineering. The application was a little bit different. Then the format was different, but can still give you an idea for how technical does my research statement have to be, or what kinds of things did they talk about in their statement, how personal was their personal statement, those kinds of things, just as examples, just to kind of give you an idea of what a winning essay looks like. Have people read it who aren't in your field. That way you can tell really if you've done a good job of avoiding jargon. We have a writing center here on campus. I know on the fellowship workshop that you guys went to at the end of August, they mentioned that. Work closely with your advisor. They can help you with your research statement in particular. But again, there's a lot of online resources, and the website for the program is extremely helpful. So it skipped a slide. Hold on, let me come back here. Okay, so another important thing that I want to mention is your letters of recommendation, okay? So all of you successfully applied or are applying to graduate school, so you have people who have written really nice things about you because you got admitted. So, so that is kind of where I would go to first. Obviously, your research advisor and mentor here is the person that you should expect to get a letter from them. A couple things that I want to point out. So you can solicit as many as 5 letter writers. So you have your top 3. These are the people who know you well, can really speak to your past accomplishments and your future plans and your aptitude, okay? So what these letters should do, and each one can be no more than 2 pages, what these letters should do is they should talk about the intellectual merits and broader impacts of your work. It specifically says this in the solicitation. And you want people who are going to complement your application, okay? I heard from somebody who's worked with students on this in the past that they've gotten reviewer criteria where they didn't believe that the student had done as much stuff as they said that they had done. And having a letter writer, like, so for example, this student that I worked with last year who was successful, worked full-time in a research lab as a volunteer, was a double major in biomedical engineering and biochemistry. She won the prize for biochemistry for the Provost Award for her project, which was both in biomedical engineering and biochemistry. She won a number of leadership awards. She started a number of organizations on campus. Before she walked across the stage in May, the year she graduated, she had already started working for a startup company called In Vivo Therapeutics and was working on their product that was going into clinical trials. I mean, she's kind of a rock star. But, in terms of saying, how could one person do all this stuff? I know as a letter writer for her, I spoke to each of those things to say, no, really, she did all of that stuff. Like, I worked with her on many of these things. So you want somebody who can back you up, again, for your credibility, okay? Does that make sense? You also don't want, I think I said this, you don't want them all to say the same thing about you either. Okay, so each piece of this application is going to come together and it's going to contribute something different. So when students come to me and ask for letters of recommendation, I often tell my academic advisees, so if I have a student who I'm their academic advisor, but I've never had them in a course, I've never supervised their research, I don't really know them very much other than we meet maybe a couple times a year, once a term, and I can tell what's already in the transcript. See what I'm saying? So my letter isn't going to help them any. It's not going to give any more information probably than what their transcript already says. So I'll usually turn down those kinds of letter requests just to help the student write a stronger application. Like, I'm going to repeat your transcript. Don't use me. Use somebody who was your senior capstone engineering design, advisor. Somebody who's your supervisor in a company who can really, speak to your leadership capabilities, your ability to get stuff done. Those are the kinds of people you want to strengthen. Every little piece of this application should strengthen and complement each other part. Does that make sense? So, be careful who you choose. We had an instance, and I think you heard about this at the fellowship workshop in August, who their advisor, they chose somebody who they had just started working with at WPI, and then at the last minute they're like, oh, well, I'm not going to have time to write this, and I don't feel like I really know you very well yet. That was bad. So you want to make sure, like I said, if you have backup people, then that's useful. For those of you who are in the IGRT program, I'm working with you. I've gotten to know you. If you're doing outreach stuff, I can speak to that. So, talk to people who who know you well, and you can count on them to write a good letter. It also would be helpful if you provide your application materials to them. That way they can tell that they're backing you up because they've read what you're telling the NSF, and they can corroborate some of that, okay? The other reason is I won't write a letter for a student who doesn't give me their application materials, because they're going to send me this link and I'm going to spend all this time writing this letter, and then I find out that they didn't actually apply. So I want to know that they're serious and that they've really put a lot of thought into this. So it's informative for them too, because they can see what are you saying about yourself, and how can I corroborate that and support that. The other thing is, and then if you have the opportunity, you may not, because if you're asking somebody who is not at WPI, somebody who's speaking to your previous experience, you may not be able to meet with them in person, but maybe a phone call or something just to say, I'm applying for this. There's some very specific things they asked for in the letter. I know you've provided letters for me in the past, and I appreciate it. Could you, there are some things in here that need to go in. Tell them that you're going to send them your application materials. Some faculty, not me, but some people I know, will actually ask to provide a draft. So if there's things that you want in the letter, and I've done this myself when I was applying for fellowships and things, and I knew that my one of my advisors was not going to have time to write the kind of letter that I wanted. I actually drafted it for him. That is an approach, just so that he knew, and so everything that I wanted him to say about me was in there. And I was like, you can edit this as appropriate, but this is what I would say if I were you. That's one way to approach things too, if you're not confident that somebody's going to be able to get everything in there that you want them to speak to. But to that, if you're drafting them, you don't want to send the same draft to everybody, right? So you want to make sure that they don't all say the same thing. Somebody is supporting what you're claiming about yourself as an awesome, undergraduate researcher, and then somebody's supporting, your outreach and leadership. Somebody's supporting, this has been a great person in my lab. They've only been here for a few weeks, but they've already really hit the ground running. The Fastlane system, and actually most application systems for fellowships, will enable you to track your completeness, so you can see who the delinquents are if they haven't gotten your application, your reference letters in yet. So pay attention to that, and as it's getting closer, don't nag. There's nothing I hate more than when a student will email me like 3 months in advance that something's due, and then email me every week from there on out. It gets really irritating. But if it's getting, if it's a week or two, maybe 2 weeks to the deadline, and the person still hasn't uploaded their application, or especially if it's like a week, make sure you're like, oh, just remember you said you were going to do this for me. Can you, I'm just checking in to make sure that you're going to make that deadline. Is good. And again, if you have backups, that's good. Now, if you get all 3 of your top choices, the people that you really wanted, and the other 2 haven't submitted it yet, make sure you tell them, because that's another big pet peeve if you're writing letters, and I've written hundreds, maybe thousands at this point. If you don't need it anymore, tell them, because that's one less thing they have to do today.
So basically, the system, you'll see as they're submitting it, and you can pick which 3 actually go forward with mine.
Yes, that's my understanding. I haven't actually been in the Fastlane system, but they have screenshots of the Fastlane system in there, and that was what they mentioned, that you can actually choose. Don't quote me on that, but that's my understanding from reading the instructions. Let's see. I think that's it for that. The last thing that I wanted to talk about again was resources, and then I'll take more questions from you guys. Okay. Tips for all fellowship applications. So now this hopefully will be, what I've told you up until this point about personal statements, research statements may be different. If you are applying for a foundation fellowship or for a really research intensive type of like for example, we have students in our department who have successfully competed for American Heart Association predoctoral fellowships and National Institutes of Health training fellowships. So again, if you're interested in either one of those programs, let me know. I can connect you with students who have been successful in those endeavors and can share probably be willing to share their application materials. With those, the research statement is going to be much more specific and much more important. And this is important too, don't get me wrong, but you're going to be the American Heart Association. You would imagine that those people are all going to be experts in cardiovascular medicine. So you assume different things about your audience. You want to be much more specific. Read the solicitation carefully for all applications. They can change from year to year. They have different required documentation. Here's another fun story. I have a PhD student who shall remain nameless, who had applied for an American Heart Association fellowship. And it turns out that when you apply for a fellowship to the American Heart Association, there are a number of additional documents that are required, including a mentorship plan, a list of where your advisor's past trainees have gone on, how many past trainees your advisor has had, it was a letter of recommendation. There was at least one other thing. There were 4 pieces of documentation that I needed to prepare to support the student's fellowship application that I found out about 24 hours before the deadline. Yeah, that was fun. So anyway, I was able to pull it off. But again, if you want if you want those to be written well and complete, then make sure you read the solicitation carefully, because I didn't know that. It was her responsibility to read it carefully and know what was required. So same thing for this. Make sure you understand all the pieces that are required, all your transcripts, all the documentation that they expect. The other thing is the NSF will not look at anything that they don't specifically tell you they want. So don't send additional stuff to them. They're very specific about what they want. Every solicitation is different. Obviously pay attention to deadlines and pay attention to eligibility criteria, because depending on the solicitation, on the program, the time and expectations for the award type may be different. So for example, the NSF also has a dissertation development grant, which is for students who have passed their PhD students who have passed their qualifying exams. So now you're kind of in the later stage. You're not in the earliest stages anymore. There are also fellowships, I know, through the American Association for University Women, where if you are past your proposal defense of your PhD, so you're just wrapping up your dissertation, there are fellowships that will support you for that. If there's citizenship criteria like there are for the NSF fellowships, you know, you want to pay attention to that. You don't want to prepare something and find out you're never eligible in the first place. So again, depending on what stage you're at, those applications where it's later stage, it's to support your dissertation, they're going to be much higher expectations for how many papers you've published, how many presentations you've given. So if you're farther along in your career, you know, make sure that, you know, you're productive. Okay, so that's something that's really important. So work with your research advisor and mentor. Make sure you get those opportunities. Of course, it's on you how fast the research goes for the most part, right? So, you know, so that means you should be in lab at least 100 hours a week, right? So, you know, keep things moving along, but also make sure that you're presenting, you're publishing. You know, push your advisor if you're not having if you don't have those opportunities. Sometimes that's what it needs. We're busy with all sorts of other stuff. We're teaching, we're writing grants, we're reviewing grants, we're reviewing manuscripts, we're advising you, we're doing all sorts of stuff, and so it may not be on our bandwidth. So be proactive. We like it when our students are proactive. And see, there, I'm going to have to stop talking soon. The other thing is, this is a little thing, but it could be important. Again, choosing reference writers carefully. I mentioned that already. The other thing is be aware, this may be not something that's on your radar, but be aware of your brand. So there's a lot of opportunities through LinkedIn, through ResearchGate, through other things to kind of create a profile of who you are. Google Scholar. So if you have patents and some of you have worked, you know, and I know when I came to graduate school, I had already had 3 patent applications from work that I did in my company. If you have patent applications, if you have, sometimes when you present, the abstracts are published, you can create a profile in Google Scholar that will link to all those things. So again, you can really create a profile of who you are. What you don't want to do is have somebody Googles your name, you don't want them to find anything overly unprofessional out there in the world about you. So be mindful of what people, if people Google you or go looking for you online, what are they going to find? Okay, so this is something sometimes maybe we don't think about, but something to be mindful of. Because you're really developing, and in hearing about what the students were saying about their personal statements, you're developing your brand. Who are you? You actually do a lot more marketing in science and engineering than you realize, because you really are, when you think about going out in the job market, you're marketing yourself. You are your own product. You are your own brand. So think about that when you're developing your statement and when you're thinking about, if somebody goes looking for me online, what are they going to find? And people do that. When I met, right before I met my first PhD student, I hadn't started at WPI yet, and I did a quick Google search and found out, really the only thing I found out about her online was that she played hockey and that she was pretty good. She scored some goals. She had also spent some time in the penalty box, so that was interesting. I was like, oh, this is my kind of person. So people do use that as a tool, so just be mindful of what people will find when they go looking for you. I think the last thing I have here is to respond to reviewer comments. So you're going to get feedback back from the reviewers. Don't be discouraged. One of the things that's hardest, I think, to learn about this whole process is that you're going to get feedback. It's not all going to be positive, and sometimes you're going to get a reviewer, you're going to be unlucky. You're going to get a reviewer who just does not get what you're trying to do, doesn't understand your field. So you can do the best job that you can, and sometimes, like I said, you're going to get somebody who doesn't really fight for your proposal, doesn't really believe in what you're doing, doesn't really understand what you're doing. Don't be discouraged. I remember the first time I got a grant review back after I started at WPI, I had to lie down for like a week because it was just so awful, some of the things that they said about me, and I was like, oh, you can't take it personally, okay? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but anyway, don't take it personally. Sometimes you're just unlucky. So be persistent, and again, I can promise you, you will not get a fellowship if you don't apply. So, make sure that you apply, and again, don't be discouraged. Apply, 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 apply. It's good practice, and again, eventually you will be successful. I mean, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 tries, but you will be successful. And then the other thing is we want to hear about your success. I think Dean Camisano said this at the other event. So the student who I've been talking about is like the greatest student ever, never let me know that she won it. I was the one who encouraged her to apply because I knew she was a rock star. And I wrote a letter for her, and then I went looking for her online for a different reason because I had some patent paperwork I had to send her to sign. And I was like, did my Google search because I couldn't find her current email address. And I found out that she'd won this fellowship. I was like, that's fantastic. Why on earth did you not tell me that? I want to hear about that. That's great. I'm celebrating her success. So make sure you go back to your letter writers and tell them, thank you, and I was successful. Even if you're not successful, just say, this is a great experience, and I'm going to try again. Would you be willing to write for me again? So like I said, don't be discouraged. Those of you who have been or embarking on science and engineering careers, or maybe have been in science and engineering for a while, know that, you know, not every experiment you do is going to be a success. I know, you know, shocking. I don't want to, you know, really burst your bubble here at the beginning of your graduate career, but you know, be persistent, learn from your experiences, and keep moving. I mean, we know you guys are fantastic, and we expect there are about approximately 2,000 fellowships from this program that are awarded each year, and I fully expect that we'll have quite a few WPI students who will get them this year. So thank you very much for your attention, and good luck. And again, feel free to contact me if I can help you in any way.